Yvonne, it is so great to see you today. Thank you so much for joining us on C60 Health Connections.
My pleasure. Great to see you too, Jess.
I am so excited about this conversation. Not only are you a dear friend of mine, but you are one of the most interesting women that I know. And I'm honored to share some space with you today. Can you help our audience understand a little bit about your background? And please tell us, how did you get started out in your career?
Well, I am a gynecologist and OBGYN by original training, and I have over 20 years experience in doing that. So in that journey, it was really, I was raised with traditional medicine, and I was a dyed-in-the-wool traditional medicine doctor. I'm an MD. I did military training for my residency, which was very, very traditional and academic. Like, we could quote all the studies about randomized clinical trials and, the best way according to these studies to do things. And so that was my background. And I really went into medicine to help people. And over time, I started to realize that I didn't have the right tools in my toolbox to help the women that were really struggling in front of me. And OBGYN is kind of a unique relationship that you have with your patients, because people share things most likely with their OBGYN that they don't feel comfortable sharing with other people. And so I would hear from women about their struggles, fatigue, and I'm gaining weight and I'm not doing anything different and I can't think straight and I have all these mood swings. And so, it must be my hormones because my regular doctor says everything else is okay. And sometimes their hormones were off, but sometimes their hormones were within what we call normal range. And I was like, I know they're not lying to me. So what is wrong? Sometimes, the traditional medicine model will in effect gaslight women with these symptoms like, oh, well, your labs are normal. So, here's an antidepressant, or here's birth control pills, or here's something else. And I knew that I had to be missing something. And so that was one of my aha moments that maybe I needed to expand my horizons outside of this traditional medicine model. But really, the kicker for me was I started to have my own personal struggle with fatigue. And it was tough because I was in a group of 3 OBGYNs. And so we were on call every third night, sometimes every other, when one of my partners would be gone. And it was very, very rigorous. Babies come at all hours. And in obstetrics, things can go from normal and happy to a life-threatening emergency in 10 seconds. And so there's a lot of stress involved in that. And even though it was very fulfilling and I cared deeply for my patients, it started to take a toll on me. I didn't recognize myself half the time. I would have this short fuse where I would, fly off the handle when things didn't go exactly like they should. And I felt like I was really, becoming this person that I didn't want to be. And I realized it was because I was kind of drowning. I was drowning in this fatigue and this stress, and I was barely able to keep afloat. And anytime something didn't go exactly as it was supposed to, it was like somebody was dunking me under the water. And so I would thrash around and lash out at people. And then, but I was a doctor, so I was going to keep going. And then, a few years later, it really kind of stopped me in my tracks because I had this really severe episode of vertigo that happened after a night of being on call. And I actually thought I was having a stroke. I couldn't stand up. I couldn't walk. I was sick to my stomach. I was home alone because my husband and my boys were at a baseball game. This was back when they were smaller and they were in Little League. And I actually had to call my husband to leave the game and take me to the ER. And I remember thinking, because my husband was a stay-at-home dad, and I was like, what happens if this is a stroke? How's my husband going to care for 2 small boys and me? I'm going to be on disability. And anyway, we got to the ER. They did several hours worth of evaluation, and luckily it wasn't a stroke. It was what they call benign vertigo, which means you're really dizzy and we don't know why. And after it happened more than once, I realized that it was the fatigue and the stress that were affecting my brain's ability to know where my balance centers were. And so that after that happened the second time, after another rough night on call, I was like, okay, this job is killing me. So I actually had to quit part of my practice, and I stopped delivering babies and did gynecology only. And I started to expand what I was trying to do with my women. Let's help women with their weight. Let's help them with these other things. And that's when it was like, wow, I don't have the right tools. And I started to investigate bioidentical hormones and how stress and thyroid and everything affects weight. And so it led me into the functional medicine world, where we really look at optimal health instead of just normal. And that it's just been a journey that's been absolutely wonderful. So now I really feel like I have the right tools to help people be their best, instead of just prescribing a birth control pill or an antidepressant, or offering to do radical surgery and removing their uterus if they're not feeling well with their menstrual cycle. So it's been quite a journey.
That's so wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. What branch of the military did you serve in?
I was in the Air Force.
Thank you for your service. I know that that's something that a lot of people don't know about you, and I think that it is such a gift and a blessing that you grew up in that environment. And thank you for all of your dedication and hard work for all of us. Thank you very much. So let's talk a little bit about as you're going through your personal journey, and as you had this experience with vertigo, and as you're dealing with your own kind of burnout, what were some of the first steps that you took to help support yourself on your own journey? Well, what were some of those first aha moments and realizations that you had about changes that you needed to make as you went down this functional medicine path?
It's kind of funny, because one of the reasons I wanted to do functional medicine is that I was like, okay, I need to take better care of myself in order to withstand the rigors of my profession. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to learn about nutrition. I'm going to learn about how to optimize my micronutrients and optimizing hormone status as opposed to normal range. And so I was really going down that pathway and learning a lot. And every lecture that I would go to, because I did a fellowship program through the Metabolic Medical Institute. It was very detailed and thorough, but every lecture, when they were talking about how to optimize your health with the supplementation and the hormones and everything, they would say, but if you're not sleeping, you can't out supplement lack of sleep. And so I'd be like, darn it. I was hoping that learning all this stuff would, make me superwoman, where I could ignore that part and ignore the self-care. And that was really eye-opening about the sleep and the stress. And so many people, even now in my practice, where we're looking at, how to improve your nutrition, how to optimize your vitamins and minerals so that your body has a fighting chance, how to optimize your hormones. But, if you're doing all of those things and not making progress, it's like, okay, let's take a deeper look. Are you sleeping? What is your emotional status like? Are you suppressing, stress, anxiety, trauma, and things like that, and how those impact your ability to heal? And so now that led me into that much more comprehensive approach of you have to look at the whole picture. You can't just look at one aspect. And it started for me with the bioidentical hormones, because that's my background in gynecology. And so it was a natural way to enter. But then I started to realize it takes more than hormones to fix you. Hormones are incredibly important, but there are so many things that need to happen, and hormones need receptors in order to work. And there's so many things that affect the ability for the hormones to work that I can't fix someone just by giving them hormones. So we need to look at the whole picture.
That's what I so appreciate about functional medicine practitioners is that they're going after the root cause. They're just not looking at the symptoms, and they're really trying to dig down and understand, all of the factors that contribute to the illness or the disease or the dysfunction that's going on in a body. So, can you give our audience just a little bit of insight if they're interested in transitioning or finding greater support beyond their primary care provider and an allopathic medicine doctor? What kind of questions should they be asking, and what kind of searches should they be doing on the internet in order to find the right functional medicine practitioner who can help them discover what's going on with their root cause issues?
Well, for starters, the question they need to ask their regular doctor is why, because that is one of the things that traditional medicine really doesn't answer. And if
tell me more about the why part, like, because, like, give me an example, like if you say, like, hey, my hair is falling out, or I feel like I'm sweating all the time, please tell me why. Is that kind of where you're going with this?
Yeah, or I'm anxious, I can't sleep at night. What is your doctor's response to that? Here's an antidepressant and here's a sleeping pill. Mm-hmm. Instead of going, gee, I wonder why you're so anxious. Mm-hmm. Or one of my all-time favorites, or least favorites, so to speak, would be people with gallbladder problems. A doctor means well and removes their gallbladder, but nobody asks, well, I wonder why the gallbladder got so toxic that it developed these stones. And that's such a classic example of the difference between traditional medicine and functional medicine. Rather than cutting out an organ, you figure out what's going on and what caused it. And in gynecology, it's hysterectomy. Oh, you have heavy periods. Let's just do a hysterectomy and then you won't have periods anymore. Okay, but why are your hormones so imbalanced that your periods are so heavy? Or you have mood swings. And let's just take your hormones out of the control of your body and get you on birth control pills so that you have this fake level of steady hormones all the time. What about evaluating what's going on that causes this hormone imbalance? So that's the difference is unfortunately, traditional doctors are trained in like algorithm medicine. If this prescribe this, if this do this surgery. And so they just do these little algorithms, and they kind of have to do that when they only have a 10 or 15 minute appointment. But why? Why do you think that this birth control pill will help me? Why do you think, why do I have anxiety as opposed to here's a medicine to make me sleepy so that, it takes away the anxiety, but it also takes away your energy.
Yeah, thank you so much. So once they find out that their doctor is not going to ask them or give them the answer to the why, they're going to gloss over it and they're just going to write a script and say, hey, here, go get this filled, so you can kind of mask those symptoms. Then what's the next step in terms of that search for people? What should they be looking for?
Luckily, it's becoming more well-known. I think it's still a little bit hard, but I love the fact that so many of the functional medicine doctors have written books. And so there's a lot of books out there written by functional medicine doctors. Mark Hyman, is probably the most well-known, and he is at least he was, I think he still is, in charge of the Institute for Functional Medicine. So that's an excellent organization to help people get familiar. And I did some training through IFM, and then the other organization is American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine, otherwise known as A4M. And that's where I did most of my training from to get into the functional medicine world. And luckily, there's people who've written books from that organization, and you can do searches to find a local doctor on any one of those websites, and they give you people who have done their training. And so that's the starting point. But then you have to make sure that it's someone who listens to you, right? And that it's someone that you feel like you can work with. It's really a team effort. And so, like, before I take anyone into my practice as their physician, we do a 25 to 30 minute, discovery call where number one, I make sure that I think I can help them, because the worst thing is for somebody to come and see me, and then at the end of that first visit to say, sorry, I can't help you. What a waste of time. So I make sure I think that I can help them. And then we both kind of figure out does this feel like a good fit? Because this is way more than a 15-minute, here's a prescription. It's a teamwork, to get your health on track and take control of your health. And so you want to make sure that it feels like the right fit for someone for you to work with. Awesome. There's a wide range of skill set in functional medicine doctors, and some of them are, you can have multiple different degrees to be in functional medicine. There are health coaches, there are nutritionists, there are chiropractors, there are naturopaths, there are doctors of osteopathy, and there are medical doctors. So there's a wide range of backgrounds. So my background, like I said, as a medical doctor, has some advantages because I can write prescriptions and I know what they're being told by their regular doctor, because I used to say the same things. But then again, I had to really, like I said, get knocked over the head a few times before I realized that my model, the way that I had trained, was not the right model. There are doctors who know that from the beginning, right? They go into a certain field of medicine specifically because they want to do natural medicine. I was like, oh no, ACOG knows best and the Institute of Health knows best. And I had to really come to Jesus, so to speak, with what I was doing not working, and find my true calling in order to jump ship and make that big change.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. One of the things that I want to dive into next with you is, I know you've got a really special message and a unique perspective for all of us about how toxins can really damage the fat in our mitochondria and our cell membranes, which is something that I've learned from you. We specialize and work in the mitochondria space, so to speak. And so I would love for you to share with your audience, share with our audience more about this special message that you have for all of us.
Well, thanks for asking. Yeah, it is my passion. And one of my statements is, it takes more than hormones to fix your hormones, because so many people think, I know what's wrong with me. I just need more hormones, and somebody's going to give me the right prescription. And now I'm going to have energy and I'm going to think straight. My moods aren't going to be a problem. But the issue is, hormones and receptors fit together, and hormones only work when they lodge into the receptor. And that's what triggers a response. The hormone's just a messenger. And so the issue is that these receptors sit on your cell membrane, and the cell membrane is made out of fat. And if your cell membranes are damaged, then it's like the hormone receptor sitting on this crumbling structure, and it doesn't have the right shape. And you can have all the hormones in the world, but if your receptors are damaged, then your hormones are not going to work. And pouring more hormones is not going to fix that. And so if you picture the cell membrane and the mitochondria, because the mitochondria and the cell membrane have the same structure, they're made out of these two layers of fat that are like they're phospholipids, but it makes a sandwich. And it's supposed to be flexible but sturdy, like saran wrap. So just picture plastic wrap. And it's mobile, but it's stable. Right. And so you can cover a dish with it and it keeps your food fresh. But what happens to saran wrap if you hold it over an open flame?
It melts.
It melts. And so that's what happens to the fats in your cell membrane when they are exposed to oxidation from toxins. They melt. They actually change their structure. And so this poor little hormone receptor that's sitting on this melted layer now has no structure, and it cannot work right. And when your mitochondria melt because of the damaged fats, now you have leaky batteries. So your mitochondria are like the intercellular batteries that make energy. And if you have leaky batteries, you can't make energy. So that's how brain fog and weight gain and fatigue are all related, because it's the damage to the fat from the toxins that leads to the broken mitochondria. Your brain is 60% fat, and your hormone receptors sit on your membranes, which are made out of fat. And so that's how they're all interconnected. And the good news is that we can fix that. But, we have to turn off the flamethrower, right? So that's the toxins. if you start trying to rebuild, but you never turn off the flamethrower, you're swimming upstream. You're never going to make process.
What do you think are the most damaging toxins that you see impacting this issue with people in your clinic?
Mold is huge. Mold is a huge one. However, the ones that I see significantly also are the chemical toxicants, because they are everywhere, right? So we don't have control over what they spray in the neighbor's yard. And I live in Illinois, and corn and soybeans are two of the biggest crops. And I'm in the suburbs, so a lot of the houses in the suburbs back up to cornfields, and they're crop dusted and sprayed. And these chemicals add up, and they disrupt our hormones, and they totally melt the cell membranes. And then mold is huge. Mycotoxins are a dangerous chemical secreted by mold that's like a major flamethrower. And so anything that will damage cause the oxidation and the inflammation of the cell membranes is going to cause that damage.
So what are you doing to help your patients work through this issue? Because it's a big issue.
It's huge. It's huge. Well, number one, we have to be realistic, because we're not going to all go live in Alaska in a tent away from all toxins, right? So we have to kind of really look at it. What do we have control over? And what are we willing to do? And so we have control over what we put in our mouth, what we put on our skin, what we spray in our yards. And so let's start there. And so we really take a deep dive into that. And we want to enjoy life too, right? If I told you that you could only eat, peas and Brussels sprouts, but you were going to, that would be what you needed to do to be healthy forever, but you hated peas and Brussels sprouts, would you want to do that? So we really try to be practical about, let's look at how you enjoy and find the joy in life and the joy in food, and find things that are sustainable, because it's not practical to be so strict that you can't sustain it, because then you just lose hope and you're like, I can't do it. It's not worth it. So that's where we really start with the top three. Food, the products we put on our skin, because your skin absorbs things so well. And then, what we spray around our house and in our yard, those things we do have control over. And taking care of those things can make a huge difference, because if, I think of health like a bucket. Right. So we're given this bucket at birth, and it signifies how well our body is resilient, how well we detoxify, and then we live our lives. And so we start accumulating this toxic load. And the things that fill the bucket are stress, poor nutrition, and toxins. So if your bucket overflows, now you have a chronic illness. You might have depression. You might have anxiety. You might have autoimmunity. You might have cancer. Every genetic illness is how your body's going to break down. But it doesn't break down until you have the overflowing bucket. So if we can rein that in and lower that burden of whatever has accumulated, then we regain our resiliency, and life is so much better.
That makes so much sense. We talk a lot about these healthy lifestyle choices, and I just love that you validate every single one of these. And I love that you, at the beginning of the conversation, you said sleep was the most important thing on the top of the list. So we could assume it's sleep. Like you said, it's what you put in your mouth, choosing appropriate, nutritional, healthy, organic food when possible, being considerate of the chemicals that you're putting on your body and around your home and in your yard. I think that's all amazing. Can you talk to us a little bit about other things people can do that will support their body getting rid of senescent cells? I understand you've had some personal and also some professional experience with intermittent fasting, and we get this question about intermittent fasting all the time. So as an MD and as a functional medicine practitioner, can you tell us what your recommendations are for women and for men who are interested in going down this path and how it could potentially benefit them?
The beauty of intermittent fasting is that increases this fancy word called autophagy. And autophagy means getting rid of abnormal cells or taking out the trash, right? So you need to be able to get rid of the abnormal cells in order to rebuild new ones. And so the beauty of intermittent fasting is that it increases autophagy. It also decreases inflammation because it lowers insulin levels, and insulin can be very inflammatory if you have chronically high insulin. So my personal experience with intermittent fasting was that I did some testing on myself and I had prediabetes. And I was like, this is not good. I have a family history of obesity, and my mom unfortunately never went to the doctor, but I'm sure she was a diabetic before she passed. And so when I saw that in my labs, I'm like, okay, I need to do something about this. And my husband is the primary cook in our family, and he's a very good cook. And so I knew that I either needed to go with prediabetes, I either needed to go low carb all the time, or I thought, well, let me give this intermittent fasting a try. And so I started it. And in a 4-month period, my A1C dropped 4 points just with intermittent fasting. And that was between Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, my birthday, my wedding anniversary, and a death in the family where we had like lots of get-togethers and plenty of opportunity to kind of cheat with foods that weren't ideal for a pre-diabetic. So it made such a big difference for me. So I experienced that, and I definitely recommend it to my patients who have insulin resistance or prediabetes.
That's wonderful. And it's such good news for you. It's also great news for your patients. Now, do you have any recommendations for the difference between women and men for intermittent fasting, or do you think it's the same?
Well, men and women are definitely different. And I think it also depends on, premenopausal versus postmenopausal, because in the woman who's still cycling, her needs are going to vary depending on where she is in her cycle. So you don't necessarily, you really need to listen to your body. And so that is the key. Do I think intermittent fasting is for everyone? I try not to use that word. So I don't. People who feel bad when they intermittent fast, the first thing I tell them is to give it a little more time. Try to give it at least 4 or 5 days before you decide that you feel bad. Because initially, when you try it, if you're stuck in high insulin and you can't access your stored fat, then you feel that hangry feeling, right? Like people who say to me, well, I tried intermittent fasting for 2 days, but I was, I couldn't think straight, and I was really angry and I was jittery, but yet they're 30 pounds overweight. Okay, wait a minute. You're carrying all this stored energy right here, but you feel exhausted when you don't eat. That's because your body can't flip that switch and burn the fat. You have all this stored energy, but you can't access it. And so those people, sometimes if they'll hang with it for a couple extra days, finally the body gets that metabolic flexibility and can make that switch and then tap into the stored fat, and then they feel better. But if they do the full trial and don't feel better, then I kind of stop it at that point and say, let's work on some other things, and maybe there's things that are affecting that, and we can always circle back around to it later. But as far as, I think the issue is, number one, you need to make sure you're getting enough protein. So when you're intermittent fasting, you need to make sure that you're getting enough protein during your eating window, right? And so maybe that could be an issue for some women if they don't feel well. It's because in general, a lot of women don't get enough protein anyway. And then if they're compressing their eating window into 6 to 8 hours, they're really not getting enough protein. And you want to make sure you're nourishing your body with the protein and the healthy fat when you're eating. So it's not caloric restriction, it's time restricted eating. And so that's the difference. And if you nourish your body, as opposed to thinking I'm going to eat the same meals that I used to eat over, 6 hours, but now I'm going to, my whole eating window, I'm just going to have 2 small meals during my eating window, you might not be nourishing yourself enough. And that could be why you don't feel well.
Okay, that's really important to know. Thank you. Will you talk to us a little bit about kind of your own experience going through perimenopause? This is something that, and also kind of how it impacts your practice today, because I didn't have a clue about perimenopause. I don't feel like mainstream talks about this at all. I thought and I thought that I knew a lot about health before I started doing what I'm doing today, but I think a lot of women don't have any clue about perimenopause. They think you just have your period and then one day you go through menopause. And doctors aren't, in my opinion, doctors, OBGYNs, at least the ones that I've gone to, aren't doing a good job of explaining to women there's a process, there's a timeline, there's a period where you're going to have this hormonal shift. And I have friends who have had really bad experiences. Some of them went through menopause in their 30s and they went through it by themselves, all alone. I've had friends who, like you said, they had very heavy periods and they were recommended have a hysterectomy. These are women in their 20s and 30s. Like, these are unusual experiences. And I think the conversation around what is perimenopause, what does it mean, what's going to happen, it's really important for women to understand there's a process you're going to go through in your 30s or 40s. Sometimes it's in your 50s too. But will you talk to us a little bit about what is it? What can we expect? And, what leads up to menopause?
Yes, absolutely. And you're right. It is not very well discussed. And a lot of the reasons why it's not discussed is because, you only have two options if you're going in traditional medicine, right? Hysterectomy or birth control pills. And so the same fix for everything. Oh, your hormones are off. Here's some birth control pills. Oh, you have mood swing. Here's some anti-anxiety medicine or something like that, or antidepressants. But perimenopause is really the period of time before and after a finite time frame, which is menopause. So the definition of menopause is when your reproductive years are over. So a woman, a young girl, a baby, a female is born with a finite number of follicles on her ovary, and that's her reproductive years. And every time you have a cycle, certain number of follicles develop. So the definition of menopause is when there's no more follicles on your ovaries and you can no longer conceive. Your childbearing years are over. And that's a period that is one day. All of a sudden you're menopausal. And so the period of time before that and after that is called perimenopause, which means surrounding menopause. So we don't know when the perimenopause is until we know when your menopause is. But we do know on average, these hormonal shifts start 5 to 10 years before your menopausal date. But I think that part of the reason it starts up to 10 years prior is because our hormones are so screwed up. I don't think it needs to be that way. When you have all these toxins and hormone disruptors, you're going to have a much rougher transition into menopause. When you burn the candle at both ends all the time and you never practice self-care, you're going to have a much more difficult transition into menopause. And so we've created this own catastrophe, so to speak, of roller coaster rides of what's happening with our hormones leading up to menopause. And so women, we take care of everybody else except ourselves. And that starts in childhood, teenage years, parenting. And then at some point it starts to catch up on us. And it happens to catch up with us the same time that we're having hormone shifts. We've been married now, 10, 15, 20 years. We might be going through empty nesting. We have aging parents. We have all these things that kind of rain down on us at one time. And it's no wonder that we feel like crap. It's a lot more than hormonal shifts. It's that neglect for so many years, not valuing yourself, not using your voice, not, those kind of things really lead to a lot of the hormone imbalances. But the perimenopausal years are times when you can have high estrogen, then you have low estrogen. And it creates this, it feels like a roller coaster ride. And like I said, though, it's not supposed to be for that long of a period of time. I think the reason it lasts so long nowadays is because we've just catapulted into this high stress, high toxin, poor nutrition environment that magnifies the effects so much. And that's why birth control pills aren't the answer, right? Yeah, birth control pills will take your hormones away because now your ovaries aren't going to make any anymore because you're piling on all these fake hormones on top of it, but they have their own issues. So that I really don't think that's the answer.
this might be a loaded question, and but I'm going to ask it anyway because I am just so darn curious. Because I grew up in the generation of women that like as soon as you felt like you needed them, the doctor was like, "Hey, start taking these birth control pills. Take them forever.
Take them forever," because I was trained. They decrease your risk of ovarian cancer, so they're wonderful. Everybody should be on birth control pills.
Yeah. So let's say you're a woman who's taken them forever, and now you're not taking them anymore. What do you need to know potentially about the damages that's been done, and what should you do to start addressing and supporting your body in a more natural, balanced way? Like I said, it was a can of worms.
yeah, you did. But this is a heartbreak for me because I think women are not given enough information to make informed choices, right? They're just handed a pill and then you're like, well, what are the side effects? Oh no, most people feel good, right? Because it's convenient. Now you have planned pregnancies, and I'm all for planned pregnancies, but let's make an informed decision about what are the long-term risks. And there was a point in my career where when I was interpreting these mammograms, so, at the age of 40, women start getting these annual mammograms, and on the questionnaire of the mammogram is things that might increase the woman's risk of breast cancer. And so on one of the questions, that the radiologist asks when you go in for your mammogram is, how many years did you take birth control pills? And I was like, I was a gynecologist. And I was like, why are they asking that? Birth control pills don't cause breast cancer. That's ridiculous. Birth control pills decrease your risk of ovarian cancer. And that's all I was trained, was that, hey, it's great because it's planned pregnancy, light periods, and lower risk of ovarian cancer if you take them for 5 years. And nobody ever said, but because of the fact that they're not bioidentical natural hormones, there might be an increased risk of breast cancer. Radiologists knew it. They were trained and they asked those questions. And so that was another one of my aha moments of, wow, how could I not know that to counsel people before I give them that could increase their risk? And so I got off track a little bit, but it's something I'm really passionate about because I think that so many gynecologists, they're so pro family planning, which is good, but right. Give us a choice, give us information, and we can make choices about our long-term health.
Well, so let's assume or pretend for a minute that you're somebody who's hearing this and you're like a little bit concerned because you're one of those individuals that took those birth control pills your entire life. What should you think about? What kind of questions should you be asking of, if they're lucky enough to work with somebody like yourself, what should they be thinking about maybe in their 40s or 50s if they took birth control pills their entire life?
Well, let's clean things up, right? Let's start now. We cannot control the past, and we all make decisions based on the best information that we have at the time. Yep. So that is gone. Let's just work on nutrition, self-care, sleep, optimizing your micronutrients, balancing your hormones now. Let's do those things. And I think that can make a huge difference.
That's good. I know that a lot of women, as they're leading up towards menopause, they're dealing with fatigue, weight gain, and brain fog. What are some of the things that you recommend people do to help balance out their body, to deal with the weight, the fatigue, the brain fog?
Well, this goes back to the mitochondria and the cell membrane and the hormones, right? So let's make sure that we have healthy fat in our diet, because your brain is 60% fat and your mitochondria make energy in a layer of fat, and your hormone receptors sit on your cell membrane, which are made out of fat. So we need to eat healthy fat. And that is going to be number one, don't eat Frankenstein fat. So what I call Frankenstein fat are these like high heated industrial oils, canola oil, high heated corn oil. Those kind of things there's nothing wrong with, those things are called omega-6 fatty acids, and there's nothing wrong with omega-6 fatty acids. In fact, your cell membranes have a ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 of 4 to 1. So don't tell me that omega-6s are bad. They're not bad. The problem is the ones that we eat in our diet are Frankenstein. They used to be good, but now they've been mutilated by heat and chemical processing. So if you eat raw nuts and seeds, those have healthy fats in them, healthy omega-6s. And, animals that are allowed to eat their natural diet, they have healthy fat. But animals that are fed corn laced with Roundup and given antibiotics and all kinds of, unhealthy foods, they're not going to have the healthy fat in them. So eating healthy fat, avoiding Frankenstein fats, those are definitely important things to do. And then, we look at the detox, right? How do we get rid of that melted plastic off of our cell membranes that came from the flamethrower of the toxins? So there's things that, one of them is autophagy. So intermittent fasting, whatever can we do to help get your body to pick out that melted plastic from your cell membrane and from your mitochondria so that you have that resiliency. There's some supplements that help. So I have in my practice something that I call the membrane healing regimen, which is a group of supplements that I put people on in order to help remove the damaged fats and then phospholipids and healthy fats to rebuild. And I use your product. I use C60 in my practice because that's the ultimate fire extinguisher. So if we want to turn off that flamethrower, let's decrease inflammation. And, C60 is a really powerful anti-inflammatory, antioxidant. It extinguishes the flame. So I really kind of be practical about how do we go about healing. It's construction. It's work. We have to rebuild. So we need energy to rebuild. We need raw materials to rebuild. Everybody knows before you remodel, you have to do demolition. So let's get rid of the damaged fats. That's where the autophagy and the other things come in and help your body remove the damaged fats.
I love that. I have never, ever heard anybody call C60 the ultimate fire extinguisher. I might have to borrow that, but give you credit. That is awesome. I love that.
That's how I explain it to my patients when I put them on it.
Gosh, I love that. Okay, so these are all great suggestions. Now, you've mentioned we've been talking about toxins a little bit, being responsible for this damage that's occurring to the mitochondria. But like for normal people who were like, well, they'll get on the Google. And they'll like look if they find out about a particular toxin, and then they might say, oh well, it's not the exposure that I've had in my life or in my home. It's not at that high risk EPA level, so maybe I probably shouldn't be concerned about it. Like, can you talk to us about these levels that are published and out there and visible for the public? What do they mean? Do they really matter? Or is there something else here that we should be concerned about?
That is such a good question. And it is so important because the EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency. And so they have come up with these standards that certain toxins, certain poisons don't interfere with health at levels less than. So that's what we hear. So for instance, lead is poison, but if it's at levels less than 5 parts per billion, it's considered not harmful. And so that's where the EPA has these standards that these toxins are only harmful if they're above a certain threshold. And it's a complete fallacy. Because number one, they're looking at the average healthy person. And I don't know who that person is. Who's the average healthy person? We all have an individuality, and some people are more sensitive to toxins than others because their bucket is smaller, right? So we talked about that bucket theory. And if your bucket overflows, you get sick. And what happens if you have a small bucket? Because genetically, you don't detoxify as well. So that's issue number one. And issue number two is they're only assuming that lead is your only toxin. So if the rest of your body is completely toxin free and all you have is lead, yes, at levels less than 5 parts per billion, it's not harmful. But what happens if you have a little bit of lead and a little bit of mercury, and then you throw in some glyphosate, and then you add some, persistent organic pollutants, which we call those POPs from chemicals and plastics, and then you put mold on top of it. So you have all of these toxins, and it's the total toxic load that matters and not one individual toxin.
That makes sense. And then two, if you're happen to be in a region where you're near a chemical plant where there's just a toxic chemical spill or some kind of, whether it's an accident or a man-created, sabotage crisis situation that's created, now you've got more chemicals coming into your environment on top of all of those that you already had. So,
and newborn babies. This study scared the bejeebies out of me. Newborn babies have been found to have over 200 chemicals in their umbilical cord at delivery, and they haven't even taken their first breath yet.
So they're getting mom's toxic load?
Yes.
And are they getting it from dad too, from the sperm, or is it just from mom?
I think it's mom. Yeah, because everything goes through the placenta, and whatever is circulating in the mother ends up in the baby. The father is the sperm donor. But and that's scary because nowadays kids, right? Our babies, our children, our future are born with a bucket that's 3/4 full. Yeah. You and I were probably born with an empty bucket, but this now generation is born with a bucket that's already 3/4 full.
So for mothers that are, working through that family planning stage right now, would you recommend a detoxification process in advance of attempting to get pregnant?
Absolutely. It has to be at least 6 months advance. You can't say, oh, I want to get pregnant next month, let me detox, because you don't want to detox during pregnancy.
Right.
And, while I use that word, let me just caution everybody to be really careful with detox, because detox is like cranking up the faucets full blast. And you have to make sure that you have a big enough sink and that your drain is open. Otherwise, you get like plumbing problems and your sink overflows. And people who are really toxic can get sick if they try to do it on their own. And so that is not the first thing I do with my patients. I always work on the foundational work of, reducing stress, opening the drains, making sure that you drink enough water, that you poop every day. The thing that's not risky is to decrease ongoing exposure. So you can reduce the amount that's coming in, and nobody's going to get sick from doing that. Reducing what's going in, making sure that you sleep enough, drink enough, poop enough. But then when you start to say, okay, now we're going to go after these toxins that are hiding in the body, in the bone and the fat, because we want to reduce the total body load, that's where you need to work with someone that understands how to do it safely, because people can get sick. And so, these Facebook groups, right, or whatever, where people are doing this DIY detox. And I see this a lot at the first of the year when everybody's, it's January, we're going to do the January detox. And then they talk about, oh, I have a headache, I don't feel good. And people are like, yeah, you're really detoxing. That's why you don't feel good. And it's like they don't understand that that's bad. If you feel sick, you overdid it. And you should not feel sick when you do this. And if you are, then you're losing more toxins than you're able to get rid of. And you can actually cause more harm than good.
That's really good advice. So I know we're almost about out of time. I want to respect your time because you've got patients and a busy day. So let me just ask you this, just to close out on the cell membrane damage problem. What are the top 3 things you suggest people do, whether they're planning on getting pregnant or whether they want to deal with the toxic burden in their life and clean up their health overall? What are the top 3 suggestions that you have to help support repairing cell membranes?
So reduce ongoing exposure, because your body is beautifully equipped to help repair if we quit damaging it. So look at the top 3: what you eat, what you put on your skin, what you use around your house and your yard, and learn how to read labels. Make sure that you're not, if it has 20 ingredients in it and it sounds like a science experiment, don't eat it. So that's huge. And then, so you're reducing ongoing exposure, and then you're going to not eat inflammatory foods. Don't eat the Frankenstein fats. Anything that's processed has Frankenstein fat in it, because the regular fat doesn't have a long shelf life, but the Frankenstein fats will last for 6 to 12 months without going rancid because they're not real. And so then the third one would be to rebuild, concentrate on the healthy fats, the omega-3 and the omega-6s that are not adulterated. And that gives your body the raw materials to rebuild.
Wonderful. Thank you. So, Yvonne, I understand for our female listeners out there, you've got a special treat. You've got a hormone imbalance quiz. And so can you tell people, we'll pop it up here, if they want to get in touch with you, how they can work with you. And for our female listeners, if they want to do the hormone imbalance quiz, where they can find that at.
Yeah, great. I all my social media is Yvonne Karney, MD. And my website, you can reach me, YvonneKarneyMD.com. And that takes you to my medical practice website. So I have a medical practice in the Chicago suburbs. Right now, I have to work only one-on-one with people who can either come to Illinois for their first visit or Illinois residents. But I'm really working on, in the near future, having the ability to cross state lines and work with people in more of like a program that's supervised, but not with me as their doctor. So that's coming in the next probably few months. And in the meantime, on my website, it was a labor of love. It's a very thorough hormone imbalance quiz. And so it takes about 5 minutes to do, because there's some questions that are, pretty detailed. But as a result, what you're going to get is a diagnosis of what are your most likely hormone imbalances, along with some suggestions to try to rebalance them.
That's so exciting. Thank you so much. And we'll make sure to include all of your links in our show notes. We'll also pop them up here. And when you have your new program out that expands beyond the Chicago metro area, we'll make sure to include that information in our show notes as well. Yvonne, it has been a pleasure speaking with you. I probably could talk to you all day long, but I know you've got to go back to work, so I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much for your time, all of your words of wisdom, and thank you for all the good that you're doing on the planet. We need more people like you. Thank you for helping wake others up and support us on our health and wellness journey.
Well, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
All right. Talk to you soon.